we'll look at it from a sort of a big picture point of view this evening, and I hope that will encourage you to get into this psalm a little more. It really is a wonderful treasure chest. Well, with Paul McCartney on the stage at Glastonbury last night, it reminded me I really am and always will be a huge Beatles fan from when I was tiny, age 5, and had my first copy of a mono pressing of A Hard Day's Night right the way through. Anyway, somebody well associated to Paul McCartney said this: "Imagine there's no heaven. It's easy if you try. No hell below us, above us, only sky. Imagine all the people living life in peace." Well, of course, that was a song of John Lennon from the early 1970s, and it was a huge hit, and its popularity continues today, with lots of people choosing it for their Desert Island Discs on Radio 4. And it's a very anti-God statement, isn't it? But he was just one of influential voices at the time who believed that ridding ourselves of God and his moral teaching would bring about a new age of freedom, peace, and prosperity. Well, I think probably we can agree that in Europe, at least, we live in a very irreligious post-Christian age. That's what most people think. But research tells us that also the majority of people still believe in the spiritual. Now, John Lennon's promise of peace has proven, of course, to be absolute nonsense. There is no God-free, moral-free, science-based utopia. Secularism and science have failed to improve or even to explain human life as it really is. The more you promote the physical, the more you damage and impoverish the inner person. Now, does the spiritual and God in particular have something to offer after all? That's what people wonder, because they have this deep, innate sense that there is this spiritual dimension to life, even if they can't pin it down or explain it in words. Now, I'd suggest that Psalm 19 helps us understand some of the reasons why they have, or indeed we all have, this deep sense of the spiritual as human beings. The psalm shines a light on what drives that intuition, where the evidence is, and that a lot of people, certainly in Europe, are currently blind to, and where this light of revelation could and should take all human beings. Now, there are 3 main sections in the psalm, and for simplicity, we're going to follow that structure this evening. So in verses 1 to 6, we have what I'm calling creation testimony. Then in 7 to 11, Bible testimony. And then 12 to 14, personal testimony. Now, no surprise from those titles that this is a psalm of testimony. Well, what does that mean? And what is it about? Well, it's about God, and a God who has something to say to us. That's why it's called a revelation, the Bible. And a testimony is what a witness gives in court. It's evidence. It's a presentation of the facts and the truth. Now, together, this trio of testimonies presents proof beyond dispute. Testimony written in creation, if you like, an outer light being shone on our physical lives for our health. And then a testimony written in the Bibles, an inner light for the health of our psychological selves and our souls. And then a testimony written in the lives of God's people. The first 2 lights, you see, are no good if we don't help them shine. Do you remember Jesus says, don't put your light under a bushel. Is that the expression he used? Yeah. Be salt. Don't lose your saltiness. So, verses 1 to 6, creation testimony, the first of our headings. In Romans chapter 1, Paul says this: "Since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and his divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made," what has been created. So people are without excuse. Now you can imagine many people in today's world would scoff, "Oh, you're being terribly unscientific, Paul, aren't you?" But you see, the Apostle Paul takes this as self-evident, and that to deny this evidence is actually plain dishonest and self-deceit. Now you'll notice that the psalm, when it talks about the creation, only talks about one part of it, and that is the skies. But it's the bit that's filled with light, the first thing God created. The skies are the most visual and striking element, are they not? The element that envelops the rest of our physical spaces. Understand the skies and what they say about God, and we can extrapolate and work out the rest for ourselves. Well, what are we told here? Verse 1 and 2, that the skies speak to us continually. They impart knowledge or evidence. Verse 3, that this speech is a silent testimony. Verse 4, that it's a testimony for everybody. And verses 4 to 6, that there is a power in creation that is both a loving person and a powerful protector. Now, if no spoken language is used, don't you find yourself, like me, asking, well, in what ways does creation declare? What way does it proclaim or pour forth speech and reveal knowledge? After all, these are descriptions in logical spoken language. What is this language that the sky uses? Well, we can begin to get something of it from this psalm. Undoubtedly, the sky, is it not, a thing of rare splendor and beauty, changing all the time. I don't know if some of you are photographers. I love going and capturing some of these summer sunsets. They are simply amazing. And from, every 5 minutes you have a different light show that puts all our best firework displays to shame. So the sky can affect our mood, can it not, as it changes from sunny to grey and overcast to blacks and to purples. It can be painted in deep Prussian blues to just gentle cyan washes, or tinged with golds and yellows, reds and oranges. It can be adorned with clouds of all shapes and sizes that are angry and heavy, or delicate and soothing in the most amazing array of shapes. And let's not forget, it can be filled with ethereal moonlight, or bathed in darkness, revealing the galaxies and the starlight from a million suns and other galaxies. And then the skies bring, do they not, the changing weather patterns, carrying winds from calm, gentle breezes on the summer day to the fierce hurricanes. And one glance at the sky tells us what the weather's going to be like today, and what time of day it is, perhaps what time of year it is, and what sort of weather we'll be enjoying, or, well, if you live in our temperate climate, enduring. By the skies, we know the vastness of space and the size of creation that fills us with questions of awe and wonder. I mean, in terms of speaking, we hear, do we not, a lot from the skies. And it's life-sustaining. It's from the heavens that we're sustained as living organisms. The skies bring us the heat from the sun that allows photosynthesis and stops everything from freezing over in an endless winter. It feeds the food chain. From above, we get the rain to make things grow and to sustain our livestock. The moon in the sky controls the tides of the world's seas and oceans. And furthermore, the skies envelop us in a cocoon of atmosphere that filters out the harmful solar rays. and keeps in all the oxygen and nitrogen that we need to breathe. I mean, all in all, this ever-changing music of the heavens appeals, does it not, to both our brains and our hearts, both intellectually and emotionally, to persuade us of a creator, his glory and his purposes. And I think it does so in some of the following ways. By its sheer scale, its complexity and majesty, by the provision of the most basic elements to sustain life, by its consistent patterns seen in days and nights, seasons and years, by the unchanging laws of physics and chemistry, which allows human beings to observe and study the created order. In carrying out this scientific investigation, of course, humanity has discovered the language of mathematics, letting us measure and analyze, trade and engineer. The incredible advances of astronomy as well, that's driven much of that, certainly in physics, all that research. And then there's the biological language of DNA, that with just an alphabet of just 3 letters has brought forth a myriad of plants and animals, including our own bodies. This physical universe that the skies that we see is a mechanistic system of technical and programmatic routines. As we see this design and pattern in the natural world, can we not work out from it a number of evidences of a conscious and active designer, engineer, and lawgiver, God? Moreover, we can begin, can we not, to discern through it his character of order and what he expects of us, his creatures. But it's not just the way the laws of science reveal the Creator and his purposes that David, the psalmist, wants to tell us about. God communicates with us in other ways too. So let's come to our second heading, Bible testimony in verses 7 to 11. Now, as we come here, so we leave behind the creation testimony and find a written testimony, not in God's language of nature, but in the human language of Hebrew on the pages of the Bible. It consists of a series of adjectives describing the character of the Bible, in particular the Torah, which is what the Jews called their Old Testament law books. Now, you might find it helpful, I certainly do in some ways, to think about the Bible as being a bit like a handbook or a manual you get with something complicated, like a computer. We need to imagine for a moment the physical creation being like this box of high-tech gear sitting below the screen. The handbook doesn't tell us how it works at a technical level, but how we interact with it at a human level. It's the user guide, not the programming or blueprint schematics. And thank goodness for that. Complex mathematical equations and reams of C++ programming script don't really make for the best bedtime reading, or the best sermons come to that. We want and need something we can relate to in a language we can all understand that cuts to the chase. Now, the main emphasis of this written testimony of the Bible is it not, behavior and relationship? In 7 to 9 here, this behavioral emphasis is hammered home by the same idea being repeated 6 times. And do you see how they all are laws and commands? And in their own way, these behavioral or moral laws are just as magnificent and informative as the skies in the created order above us. And it's important that we do take note of this stress on God's commands, these laws. In the same way, the observable physical laws of creation affect the material world, so too there are moral laws that govern our inner selves and our behavior. Just like the physical laws, they too are designed and unchanging, revealing the Creator's imprint. Now, of course, physical laws can't be broken. You know, if I drop my iPad, it's just going to fall whatever I want. But I can break a moral law. People do it all the time. We can see it all around the world every day. Why this discrepancy? Well, I think it's a consequence of human sinfulness, isn't it? Our rebellion against God from the fall of Genesis 3 right to the present day. We human beings are in a way like the young child busily throwing spanners into the works of God's moral laws. So, where have we got to? There are laws of science and morality which form a balance of outer and inner laws. And together they all speak to us, scream to us of a creator, and tell us how he intends to shape our lives to be, physically and in terms of our behavior and relationships. You know, when I was an atheist, I said, oh, there's no God. Yes, but I knew there was. You know, you can't escape it. Everybody knows who and what God is. Some are just very angry with him. Well, given all this evidence, people are right to see, are they not, this spiritual dimension of life. John Lennon was wrong. It's vitally important, and its author is the Creator God of the Bible. The evidence of this testimony is completely overwhelming, and it's why the Apostle Paul, when he speaks to the Athenians in Acts 17, just as he did, he writes in Romans that people are completely without excuse for not recognizing this verbally. So let's go on to the third part of this psalm, what I've called personal testimony, verses 12 to 14. Now, by the time we get to this third section, it's time for us to respond to the evidence, time to accept it or ignore it. I mean, King David clearly thinks there's only one choice, and that's an unequivocal yes. It would be stupid to ignore the evidence. And he wants to live his life for God. And he wants to deal with our biggest enemy head on: sin, the rejection of God, and his right to rule. Now, in verse 14, King David has determined to ponder the deep truths of creation and the Bible. But not only that, but also to proclaim them. You see, we learn from all this evidence about God, but then we proclaim the evidence because we then proclaim God. And it's the combination of these two activities that provide this third but vital human testimony in our trio of evidences this evening. This is the Christian life. We are God's witnesses in the place that he has put us. And we shouldn't underestimate, I don't think, the power of this testimony. It's more often than not the simplicity of coming into relationship or someone being in relationship with us, watching us, listening to us speak of Jesus, that starts them on this path of faith. Well, tragically, despite everything, the majority of people in this world reject this three-pronged evidence. Why? Well, God in his mercy has given us free will. He allows people to refuse it. And furthermore, it seems to me that certainly in our modern world of 2022, that truth and evidence have been firmly demoted below personal prejudice and fantasy often. Of course, people can't escape the scientific laws, so they can and they do subvert the moral laws. And if the evidence doesn't suit them, oh, it's wrong. So let's be clear, the rejection of God centers around this matter of morality. People prefer to make their own rules rather than accept God's truth and his right to rule. They replace God's rock-solid morality with social values which change with fashion and with their whim. Just how many times we church people are accused of not moving with the times, of being out of touch. We're told that in this enlightened age, abortion is the sole moral choice of the pregnant woman, and that marriage is not just for a man and a woman, it can be for any shape of union. We're schooled in greed, being good as long as it creates wealth. We're told it's okay to engage in physical relationships outside marriage. Oh, it's healthy. And to raise children out of wedlock because, well, all shapes and sizes of family are good families, proper families. We're told that Darwinian evolution, rather than a designer, explains the world, and that teaching children about God is equivalent to indoctrinating them with wicked fairy stories. But if God is no longer the one who stipulates the boundaries of behavior and the moral law, then who is? The answer is any one of us and all of us. And you know what? That's no longer morality. It's expediency. It's something completely different. They call it morality. It's not. It's a lie. Somebody very close to me in my family had the decency, when I put that charge to him, to own up to it. Normally they don't. Really, the point is not that the church is out of step with society, but society is out of step with God. Now, it's at this point of the moral rejection that God comes and meets unbelievers through ordinary Christian men and women like us. Through us, our gospel work and witnessing the evidence, as in this psalm, God has purpose to tip the balance and persuade others to employ their free will to accept him, to use their senses, their rational and spiritual compasses. But more than that, to help people go a step further. We're here to help people to live for God and Jesus as Lord, especially when the going gets tough. And so, at the final day, be saved from hell for heaven and live and be with this amazing Creator. I wonder what other wonders he's got ready for us. It's fascinating, isn't it? Well, as we finish, I think the prayer of verse 14 here is one that perhaps we can adopt as our own. So why don't we do that as we just bow and pray? Lord, may the words of our mouths and the meditations of our hearts be pleasing in your sight. O Lord, our rock and our Redeemer. Send us out now in your power, renewed with this commitment and wonder of you, the Creator God. Amen. Amen. Thank you very much.